Welcome to People in Profit, where we look at how business shapes our world. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up, beware of the grey rhinos, why China's focusing on managing risks despite strong economic growth. On your bike, the Chinese electric scooter makers hoping to rev up sales in France. And the Game of Thrones effect, why the television industry is willing to spend more on big budget shows. First up, though, China had a pleasant surprise for the financial world when it announced better than expected growth of 6.9% between April and June. Now, Beijing is officially targeting growth of 6.5% this year, but the figures so far suggest it's likely to surpass that goal. There have been many warnings about the high level of debt in the Chinese economy and the dangers that could pose to growth. The Communist Party's official newspaper saying regulators were watching for so-called grey rhino risks, a term used to describe financial dangers which are highly probable, serious and yet often neglected. These risks even got a mention in the official statement after the growth figures were released.
Overall, the national economy has maintained sound and steady momentum in the first half of the year, laying a solid foundation for achieving or exceeding the annual targets. However, we must be aware there are still uncertainties and destabilizing factors in the world, and there are long-term structural problems within China.
The risk warning has many investors worried about a repeat of the market crash of 2 years ago. Kate Moody's been looking back at that bubble and at what's changed since then.
Well, Stephen, in the summer of 2015, China's stock markets went into freefall, sparked in part by a devaluation in the yuan that turned into a full-scale market panic. The Shanghai Composite began plunging in June and dropped more than 2,000 points by the end of August. The Shenzhen index also crashed 40%. The meltdown sent ripples across the globe. Beijing tried to stem the panic by preventing major shareholders from selling their stocks, an effort to protect the smaller investors who account for 85% of China's markets. This mass participation had fueled share price rises, but the lack of large professional shareholders made the markets more volatile. Subsequent devaluations of the currency aimed at calming the panic failed to have the desired effect. Now, in the aftermath of the 2015 crash, Beijing introduced circuit breakers designed to halt trade if stocks fell too much too fast. China has taken steps to open up its financial markets to international investors. More recently, the government grouped its financial watchdogs together and increased the regulatory power of its central bank. So why has the unusual phrase grey rhinos now emerged? Well, the biggest risk is the huge buildup of debt. The government holds direct debt of nearly 40% of its GDP, while borrowing on a local level has soared even higher. The property market is also seen as a risk. If prices continue to spiral, China's housing bubble could burst. Then there's the question of the government's promised structural reforms and whether they can take place while allowing the economy to charge ahead. And in case you're wondering, that expression grey rhino comes from something between an elephant in the room and a black swan. That's a term used to describe a surprise shock to the financial system. Also something to keep an eye on, Stephen.
Kate, thank you very much, particularly for explaining that last grey rhinos. Now we're staying in China for our next story, where the country has been trying a range of measures to reduce pollution in its major cities. In less than 5 years, electric scooters have become a common sight, with 26 million sold every year. Now, Chinese manufacturers are setting their sights on France ahead of a planned phasing out of diesel vehicles here. Our correspondents in Beijing sent this report.
Zipping along Beijing's busy roads, they barely make a noise. Electric scooters are silent but very visible on the streets of China's capital. In less than 10 years, they have become one of the most popular means of transportation for Beijingers. There are now over 4 million across the city.
Electric is better for the environment, but it's slow. The maximum speed is 50 or 60 kilometers per hour, but at least it's safe.
The price is not bad. I can charge it at my place. It's not expensive.
Personally, I prefer normal scooters, but in Beijing we must have a driving license and we have to pay more tax. That's not convenient. That's why I ride in an electric one. It's easier.
Chinese people didn't have much of a choice. In 2009, authorities launched a plan to boost clean vehicles to tackle pollution. Since then, the notorious air quality has begun to improve. The electric scooter industry is thriving thanks to subsidies and other public incentives. Now 28 million are sold every year all over the country. And there are more and more innovations, including the latest, the connected scooter.
The location of the scooter is visible through the app. If your scooter moves after you lock it with your key, there'll be a record of where it goes. It'll be tracked. If it's been stolen, you can stop it wherever it is. New locks down the vehicle through remote control, engines and batteries.
This Chinese brand, called Nio, is now targeting the French market. It has just opened its first shop in Paris and wants to make gas scooters, a blast from the past.
Now, it's been described as TV's first global blockbuster. The final season of Game of Thrones has begun airing around the world. The programme is seen as a leading light in big-budget television. Let's take a look at a clip from the new series.
If we don't put aside our enmities and band together, we will die. And then it doesn't matter whose skeleton sits on the Iron Throne.
Well, now, Game of Thrones hasn't just been a big winner for the studio HBO, it's also been part of an instrumental shift in the television industry. With me to talk about this further is Tim Westcott, who's Senior Principal Analyst for the television industry at IHS Markit. Tim, thanks for being with us. Can I ask you first of all about what the effect of Game of Thrones has been on television? Is it leading this change towards big budget spending, or how would you view it as its effect on the industry?
I don't think it's leading the way to big budget shows, because HBO has been making original programmes for some time. And a lot of other people, including Netflix and Amazon and Sky, Canal Plus, have entered the arena. It's all part of a shift of sort of high budget productions from cinema into TV. And I think what really makes Game of Thrones stand out is not just the massive amount of excitement and hype around it, which is kind of why we're talking about it now, but also the fact that it's a really global show. Everyone is following it. It's made primarily for HBO in the US, but it's really got a global audience.
And one of the things they've done with Game of Thrones is try to have an international release date across all of its markets. How important has that been in the success of the show?
I think it's kind of forced on them, really, because there's such a huge amount of piracy, such a lot of social media chatter about when a new show comes out. I mean, I think there was something like 2 million tweets about the first episode when it came out in the US, that it's almost essential for the show to be brought out to its international audience as quickly as possible, just to mitigate the risk of piracy.
As you mentioned, Game of Thrones is made by HBO, which is a studio that's been making big budget shows, original television, for a long time. You talked about the new players in the industry there as well. What's been the effect of the rise of Netflix and Amazon on the other producers in the industry?
Yeah, I think the effects on HBO is debatable. I think they're always going to do this. They're always going to have their sort of signature high-budget shows like Game of Thrones. And as you say, they've been doing that for some time. Obviously, HBO originally started out showing Hollywood movies, premiering Hollywood movies on TV. And they found that actually owning their own shows was a really valuable recipe, because not only did they get the audience for the channel in the US, but also having their own rights meant they could get income from them, from the DVD market, and then from selling the rights internationally. So a lot of people have seen how successful that formula is. You have other sort of premium players, like I mentioned, Canal Plus, like Sky. Sky has spent literally billions of pounds on acquiring sports rights, but it's actually investing in its own original drama as a kind of almost more cost-effective way of bringing its subscribers value. And the same goes for Canal Plus. And then we have the new players like Netflix in particular, which is going to spend $6 billion this year on programming. Not just on originating programming, but also buying the rights to movies and TV for its services. And the real challenge that people like Netflix are posing is that they are global. Netflix last year switched on worldwide, so it's actually available in 190 territories. And even though HBO and its like are also available internationally, it's a lot more expensive and costly to launch a linear channel with pay TV distributor partners around the world than for Netflix, where they just switch on the Netflix, the app is available, and people can subscribe and register their credit card, and bang, they're on. So the real, the challenge that Netflix is posing to the industry is that they are global, and also people have really embraced this idea of watching shows on demand, so watching them when they want to, not just on the TV, but on lots of other devices.
Look into your crystal ball for us. Are we going to see more players like Amazon joining this market with greater force and new producers coming online as well?
Yeah, I think we will see Amazon doing more. I mean, Amazon has already been stepping up a bit. It's easy to forget how much bigger as a company Amazon is to Netflix. It's a different business model. Of course, Amazon is primarily a retailer, but it has potentially vast amounts of resources that it can draw on. And indeed, we forecast that in a few years' time, Amazon will actually be spending more on content than Netflix. I think the position of other players, I don't think anyone is going to compete really dollar for dollar with the likes of Netflix. HBO itself, even though it's a major global brand, only spends something like spends $2 billion a year will spend $2 billion a year on programming this year. So I don't think people are necessarily going to be dragged into the arms race. A lot of traditional players are actually not only competing with Netflix, it's a sort of frenemy. So a company like the BBC actually sells a lot of its archive shows to Netflix. And indeed, it has said that Netflix is its major customer. So it's kind of, they are competing, pay TV operators, companies are definitely competing with Netflix, because Netflix is offering an alternative to a traditional pay TV subscription. But I think other producers, other broadcasters even, are often co-producing with Netflix and Amazon, as well as selling them their shows. So it's a kind of win-win for them.
OK, Tim Westcott from IHS Markit, thank you very much for joining us. Well, that's it from us for this week. You can always get in touch with us, though, on Facebook at France24 Business, or you can tweet me at @NewStephen. But no Game of Thrones spoilers, please. Until next time, thanks for watching.